In this section, we will continue discussing some issues regarding the schedule, project schedule, and the risk. Whenever we are talking about project risks, we have to consider time and cost. Most of the projects, if not all the projects, have risks in time and cost. Last time we discussed a little bit about the work breakdown structure and the schedule and how to construct the schedule. One of the major risks that we have having to compress the duration of a project. For sure, we don't have to compress the project as we can see this car being crashed, but we are trying to compress the duration of the critical activities that we have in the project. Whenever we are discussing the crashing process of a schedule to a project, we have to focus on the critical activities because those activities are the activities that will reduce the total duration of the project. On the other side, also, whenever we are doing kind of crashing for the activities, we are incurring kind of extra cost. So we have to consider that extra cost, or what is called the crash cost. We have to consider that crash cost when we are selecting the activities to be crashed in order to reduce the duration of the project. So whenever we are trying to make kind of crashing for the duration, we will get another risk, which is cost risk. So if you are trying to reduce the duration of a project, you will find that you have to increase the budget or the cost of the project as well. The other type to compress the schedule or the duration of the project is fast tracking. Fast tracking simply is to do some of the activities in parallel, and you used to do those activities in sequence. For example, when we are talking about a project in general, we are talking about construction project, we have the design phase, and then we have bidding phase, and we have construction phase. Usually in common projects, we do the design first and then bidding and then constructing, having the design for a consultant or engineer, and then the bidding phase. And the third phase is the construction based on the bidding. So the contractor will be responsible, or the manager, the implementing manager for the construction phase. Many times, actually, we are in a rush for that project. We are in urgent service to be provided for the community. In this case, we do what is called fast tracking by making kind of design build contract. In the design build contract, the contractor will be responsible for the design as he is responsible for the construction. Based on that, he does not have to wait until he is finishing all the design and the details activities and then start to the construction phase. He can start based on the phases. So if you are talking about the foundation, he can start with the foundation design, and then the details of the superstructure, the details, not the superstructure elements itself. We must have the superstructure elements. But the detailing and the workshop drawings could be done lately after doing the foundation. So based on that and based on eliminating the bidding phase, in this case, we are reducing the duration required for the project based on that type of fast tracking. That's on large scale. On a smaller activities, we can do the same thing like when we are doing finishing activities of a project. We can make many activities at the same time based on the requirements, based on the time, based on the cost, the crash cost we have just talked about. All of those need to be considered when you are doing kind of fast track as well. In both cases, crashing or fast tracking, we are incurring extra cost due to the compression of the duration of the project that we are going to have. This slide shows the concept of crashing. If we have the time on the x-axis and we have the cost on the vertical axis on the diagram to the right or even to the left, but we can see that on the diagram to the right, we have the time on the horizontal and cost on the vertical axis. We can find the relationship on the diagonal line that we have. As long as we are reducing the duration, the cost is being increased. This actually on kind of increment that we have for a small duration and small increase of cost, or little decrease of time and little increase in the cost or the crash cost. At the top, we can see the equation for the crash ratio. The crash ratio is the change in the cost divided by the change in the duration or in the time. We have crash cost, C sub C, minus normal cost, C sub N, divided by T sub N, normal time, minus T sub C, which is crashed time. This is the basics that we have to the right. If we are moving to the left, the diagram that we have to the left, we can see that when we are having the curve at the middle, we can see how this is kind of a broken line. So we have multiple broken lines or two lines, more than two lines, and so on. As the duration is being decreased, the cost is being increased. In the same time, we have indirect costs to be incurred for the project. But in this case, which is very good for us, as the duration of the project is being decreased, the cost of the indirect cost is being decreased as well, which is in the favor of the contractor and the owner as well. So for the planner, if you are talking about the planner or the scheduler, we have to consider the total cost, the total of the direct cost for the curve in the middle and the indirect cost for the straight line that we have at the bottom of this diagram. Adding both relations to each other, we are getting the curve at the top. We're still talking about the diagram to the left. The curve at the top going from the minimum duration, we can see that as we are increasing the duration, the cost is being reduced, getting to the minimum at the tip, at the minimum cost, minimum total cost that we have. And this is actually the optimum planning point that we should have been planning for. So we are assuming that this point, which is the minimum cost, is the plan point that we have. If you are looking for crashing, we have to move to the left. As we are moving to the left, the cost will be increasing. And we have to make kind of analysis for which point that we have to select. How many days, how many weeks we have to reduce, and how many costs we can tolerate to have extra cost for the project, and so on. So always we have to make kind of analysis for the crashing analysis that we have for the critical activities we got for the project. This is simply illustration for what is meant by the fast tracking. This is the traditional way of implementing a project. We have conceptual phase or programming, setting the program, and then the design, contract documents, bidding, and finally we have the construction. This is the traditional way for the processes of a project. In the fast track scheduling, we have the programming could be divided into sub-phases, and we can start with the design before finishing all the programming, and we can start with preparing the documents before finishing the design. We have to do some bidding for the subcontractors, and we might start the construction process before finishing the bidding. Sometimes the contractor or the design build contractor can start with the construction even during the contract documents based on the type of the construction, based on the experiences that he has, and so on. Communication, one of the most important items, and as we mentioned, the most item that leads to fail of project is the communication. That's why communication is very important whenever you are talking a project success, whenever you are talking about risk management, whenever you are talking about potential risk events that we have in a project. At the very beginning, we must have a communication management plan. Communication management plan helps us to reduce the communication risks that we have in the project. In this case, in this plan, we have to consider stakeholder requirements, all the stakeholders, or actually the main stakeholders, the most important stakeholders that we have in the project. We have to consider the information, the documents that we have, the reasons for the communication, who is requesting the communication, what are the contents of the communication element, what is the time frame, when do we have to prepare that piece of communication, who is the responsible person to prepare, what is the distribution strategy for that piece of communication, the technology to be used and the availability of the technology and the usage of the technology, the escalation process if the communication failed or the communication have some error or mistakes, and that's how to escalate the process of communication, and constraints for the communication processes, how can we manage those constraints as well, if those are technical constraints, if these are kind of interest conflicts, whatever the type of the constraints that we have to consider at the very beginning in order to achieve the best communication, in order to reduce the risks expected in the project, in order to achieve the requirements of the whole project and getting more winning events or actually winning benefits out of the project. This is a sample for the communication plan in the for the example initiation meeting, distribute project initiation plan, project kickoff meeting, status report, who is participating, what is the purpose of each communication event, the frequency or when do we have to prepare that, and at the end the type of the or the method to implement that piece of communication, whether that a meeting or a document, and the mean, is it electronic or hard copy, and so on. Communication skills are very important in order, again, to reduce the potential risks that we have in the project. Negotiation skills, writing skills, influencing skills, cross-culture communication, especially for the future years. We are expecting more cross-culture communication in a more open world in the coming years. Win-win conversation is a basic always for the project. We need all the stakeholders to be winning. Selling skills is very important. Teamwork skill is very important. Presentation skills is very important to illustrate the requirements, to illustrate the objectives, to illustrate the status that we have, to illustrate the change required. To make any influence, actually, you must have presentation skill for the people who are working in your team. I will stop at this point and continue in the next video.